They sued me for $480,000 after gifting my sister a house. The judge shocked them. My parents bought a house for my sister, then handed me the mortgage paperwork like it was my responsibility. We decided it made sense for you to cover the cost, they told me. I told them absolutely not. That's when they took things to the next level and filed a lawsuit against me for $480,000 until the judge finally saw through it all. Now, they're left regretting the day they tried to mess with me. Go ahead and read my story. But before I dive into all that, let me say this, I've noticed the channel's been slowing down a bit lately. If you're here and you like these stories, hitting that subscribe button is the easiest way to show support. It's fast, it's free, and it really helps keep this community growing strong. I'm Kayla, 29 years old, and I used to think family meant having a safety net, people who would protect, support, and treat you fairly. That belief was something I held onto tightly, like a shield. Even when I started noticing cracks in how loyal my family really was. I kept brushing it off, blaming stress or favoritism, or just bad timing. But I've learned since then, some of the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people who watched you take your first steps, sang at your birthday parties, hugged you after graduation. And sometimes, they'll smile right at you while sticking a knife in your back, with that same smile still plastered across their face. I've always been the older sibling, the steady, dependable one. My sister Sophie, who's 26 now, was always the baby of the family. Impulsive, careless, and yet somehow charming enough to skate through every mess she made. When she dropped out of college, my parents paid off her tuition debt. When she maxed out her credit cards, they swooped in to clear the balance without thinking twice. When she walked out on her 4th job in 2 years, all they said was that she needed rest, time to take care of her mental health. Meanwhile, I was juggling 2 jobs, paying off my own student loans, and carefully saving for a down payment on a modest condo. I did my best not to let resentment build. I reminded myself that everyone's path looks different. But whatever was left of that mindset got completely shattered last winter. It all kicked off with what seemed like a harmless dinner. My parents invited me over, acting overly upbeat, like they had some big surprise they couldn't wait to share. After we'd finished dessert, they handed me a sealed envelope and said it was something important they needed me to look over. I still remember exactly what they said, that I was the reliable one, and they trusted me with this kind of thing. I didn't feel uneasy until I opened the envelope and saw a name that made my stomach drop. Sophie. The paperwork was for a mortgage on a house worth nearly $500,000. But it wasn't her name on the loan. It was mine, right there, listed as the main borrower. I blinked, completely confused, thinking this had to be a mistake. Why would I be attached to this? Sophie didn't have a job, no income, and terrible credit. And yet, my parents just sat there sipping their coffee like everything was totally fine. I tried to stay calm, though I was already on edge, and asked them what the hell was going on. My mom just smiled and explained that they had bought a house for Sophie, but since she couldn't get approved for a mortgage, they used my name instead. I was floored. I asked the obvious question, who's going to pay for this? My dad waved it off like it was no big deal. They said that because I had a steady income and no kids, it made sense for me to handle the mortgage payments. The plan was that Sophie and her fiancé would move in, and I'd just keep up with the payments until they got back on their feet. I actually laughed out loud, thinking it was some twisted joke. But they weren't joking. I told them straight up that I wasn't doing it. I had my own plans, my own financial goals, and I wasn't going to throw all of that away just to bail Sophie out again. That's when my mom's whole demeanor changed. The sugary tone disappeared, and her face hardened. She said coldly, "You owe us for everything we've done for you." Then my dad chimed in, saying they'd already filled out some of the paperwork using my pre-filled mortgage application, which, as I later discovered, they had taken from my personal files during a visit to my apartment. That betrayal hit me like a brick to the chest. I walked out shaking and furious. The very next day, I got in touch with a lawyer. What came after that was pure chaos. At first, they tried to handle things quietly, calling me, laying on the guilt, even roping in distant relatives to pressure me. But when I wouldn't budge, they escalated. My own parents, my flesh and blood, dragged me to court. They claimed I had verbally agreed to take on the mortgage and that by backing out, I left them in a financial bind. They went after me for $480,000 in damages. I was stunned. What they didn't count on was the evidence I had, emails, texts, even voice recordings that clearly told a different story. But honestly, it wasn't just about proving my side. The emotional toll, that's what really wore me down. I never wanted things to reach a courtroom. A part of me kept hoping they'd snap out of it and see how wrong this was. But instead, they doubled down. Sophie even had the audacity to text me, accusing me of ruining her life and saying I'd always been jealous of her. Typical. She was always the favorite and made sure I knew it. She told me that she and her fiancé had already moved into the house. Yeah, the house they expected me to pay for, and were planning a housewarming party like everything was fine. I sent everything to my lawyer. The forged signatures, the unauthorized credit check, the manipulation, the pressure, all of it. The picture became crystal clear. My parents had worked together to dump a massive financial burden on me while keeping Sophie completely insulated from her own screw-ups. Court day came quicker than I expected, and the courtroom was packed. My parents had dragged in half the extended family, hoping to frame me as this cold, ungrateful daughter. But the judge wasn't buying it. He didn't fall for the fake tears or the rehearsed sob stories. We laid everything out. The emails, the texts, the financial records. We pointed out the forged signatures and showed messages from my mom literally admitting they'd used my personal information without asking. And then there was Sophie's text. Don't be crazy. Just pay it. You make enough money. That sealed it. The judge didn't just throw the case out, he tore into them. He called their actions manipulative and borderline criminal, said they were lucky I wasn't pressing charges for fraud. I'll never forget the look on their faces. My mom's pride shattered right there in front of everyone, and my dad's fists clenched like he was holding back rage. They lost. And not just quietly, they lost in front of everyone. But the best part? That wasn't even the revenge. That came after the ruling. And they never saw it coming. After the verdict, things shifted. Not in the way my parents had hoped. If anything, it was worse for them. They thought losing in court was the end of it. They had no clue I was just getting started. The first thing I did was file for a restraining order against both of them. I handed the judge a stack of voicemails, texts, and emails they sent me right after the hearing. Each one more unhinged than the last. Threats disguised as desperate pleas. Manipulation dressed up as concern. I had spent my entire life being their emotional sponge, their buffer against reality. That stopped right there. The restraining order got approved in less than a week. I didn't want any more contact, and I sure as hell didn't want them anywhere near my finances ever again. Then came the financial fallout. The mortgage they tried to force on me? Even though it was in Sophie's name, the bank still had all my information tied to it because of the forged documents. But since everything had been proven fraudulent in court, the bank launched an investigation into attempted mortgage fraud. Apparently, using someone else's personal info on a loan application without permission? That's a federal crime. Each of them got questioned separately, and surprise, their stories unraveled fast. My dad tried to pin the whole scheme on my mom. She turned around and blamed Sophie. Sophie claimed it was all just a misunderstanding. Meanwhile, she and her fiancé were still living in the house. The one my parents bought using fake paperwork. Once the fraud was exposed, the bank froze the title and started the repossession process. Sophie and her fiancé were given a deadline to pack up and get out. But true to form, Sophie refused. She threw a fit about how unfair it was, how she deserved to stay, how I had betrayed her. She even recorded herself crying alone in the living room, ranting about how I'd destroyed her future. She posted the video online and tagged half the family, playing the victim card. What she didn't realize, in the background of her sob story video, plain as day, was a notice from the bank taped to the door. That video Sophie posted? It ended up being proof that the house was never legally hers in the first place. 2 weeks later, she was evicted. While all that was going down, I wasn't done yet. I took it one step further. I sent out an email blast to every single family member who had accused me of being heartless, those who had called, messaged, or guilt-tripped me for supposedly tearing the family apart. I laid it all out. I gave them the full timeline, attached copies of the court ruling, screenshots of every relevant text, and even included a picture of the forged signature they tried to pass off as mine. I held nothing back. I wanted them to see the truth they were so quick to ignore. Some of them reached out with apologies. Most just stayed silent. But the ones who actually mattered, my Uncle Brian, a few cousins on my mom's side, my godmother, they called me. They said they had no idea it had gotten that ugly. They told me I was brave for standing up to all of it. Brave? I didn't feel brave. I felt drained. But something inside me had shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just absorbing the chaos, they threw it at me, and I threw it right back. And then came the final nail in the coffin. A college friend of mine works for a mid-tier media outlet that covers legal drama, especially the weird, messy kind involving families and fraud. When she heard what had happened, she pitched the story. A woman sued by her own parents for refusing to take on her sister's mortgage. It was the kind of headline that practically wrote itself. They loved it. I handed them everything, redacted legal documents, my side of the story, what it cost me emotionally, and what happened afterward. They ran it as a full feature. It blew up. The headline alone made waves online. All of a sudden, my parents were internet infamous. People found their old social media profiles and flooded them with angry comments. Sophie deactivated all her accounts. Her fiancé dumped her not long after the story dropped. Apparently, being tied to fraud wasn't such a good look anymore. Of course, my parents tried to twist it all, said I had betrayed the family's privacy. My answer? You tried to scam me out of nearly $500,000 and humiliate me. You don't get to lecture me about betrayal. I packed up and moved. New apartment. New job. I started fresh, surrounding myself with people who actually saw me, not the daughter they thought they could guilt and use until I broke. Little by little, I felt lighter. I could breathe again. No more guilt trips. No more twisted definitions of love. No more manipulation disguised as family loyalty. Last I heard, my parents sold their house and relocated to some small town. Sophie moved back in with them, trying to put her life back together. But that's not my story anymore. That's theirs. What they did taught me something I never learned from their version of love. That real love comes with respect. That being related doesn't equal loyalty. And that sometimes cutting ties isn't cruel, it's necessary for survival. They thought I'd crack under pressure. That I'd cave, play the good daughter and take on the blame, the debt, the burden. But I didn't. I didn't bend this time. I burned the damn bridge, and I watched it crumble with a smile. They walked into that courtroom thinking they had me cornered. By the time the judge was done, they weren't just embarrassed, they were rattled. because for the first time, they saw me for who I really was. Not their puppet. Not their fixer. Their reckoning.